It is always difficult to pass comment on the values and achievements of a society when so many years have passed. But it is true that unlike any other age, the extraordinary Victorian period of British history has always excited mixed emotions in those who care to look back. Many believe Victorian values are something to be aspired to. Others are disturbed to remember a society where great comfort and wealth stood in stark contrast to the dire poverty and child cruelty. Yet few could deny the age to which Queen Victoria gave her name saw incredible and monumental changes in British society. There was, for instance, the urbanisation of a country which was swept along by the Industrial Revolution, whose population rose from 25 million in the early 1800s to almost 40 million by the end of the century. There were great advances in engineering, science and medicine. There was at least some attempt to tackle the poverty and squalor which blighted the land. The era heralded the genius of Dickens and Tennyson, Stevenson and Brunel. And the British people watched in admiration as the famous Redcoat armies marched to win an empire for their queen and country. It was a remarkable era, an age of transition and progress. It was the age of Queen Victoria. I was awoke at 6 o'clock by Mamma, who told me that the Archbishop of Canterbury and Lord Coiningham were here and wished to see me. I got out of bed and went into my sitting room, only in my dressing gown and alone, and saw them. Lord Coiningham, the Lord Chamberlain, then acquainted me that my poor uncle, the King, was no more, and had expired at 12 minutes past 2 this morning, and that consequently I am Queen. It was the early hours of the 20th of June 1837 that the long reign of Queen Victoria began. She would become the longest reigning monarch in British history. Her journal noted the moment when she learned of her accession to the throne. It is said that upon hearing Lord Coiningham utter the word Queen, Victoria instinctively flung out her hand for him to kiss. It was a typical, spontaneous gesture which symbolized the young Victoria's acute awareness of her new position. She was even now bound by the concept of duty, for the entry in her diary for that momentous day reads, "I shall try to do what is fit and right." Born in 1819 to Victoria of Saxe-Coburg and Prince Edward Augustus, Victoria was a mere 18 years old when she ascended the throne. She had been a serious child, with a demeanour which is best described as spirited. "There is no royal road to music, Princess. You must practice every day," her music master had pleaded to the 7-year-old Victoria. The young princess had responded by shutting the piano with a loud bang and fixing the master with a cold stare. "You see, there is no must about it," she replied, leaving the chastened master to beg her forgiveness. As a child, Victoria was always acutely aware of her exalted position in life. She once scolded a playmate who dared to play with her toys. "You must not touch those, they are mine. And I may call you Jane, but you must not call me Victoria."
Victoria's childhood was one of seclusion. She was brought up in the confines of Kensington Palace and therefore was kept apart from the royal court. Her father died when she was very young, and she was brought up by her mother, who was a German princess, and her governess, who was also German. And so there was a European and continental influence that lasted throughout her life. There was a lot of suspicion in her household and emanating from the court about her position and her succession, and therefore she mistrusted the English establishment, and there was that separateness from it.
The Queen was of a diminutive stature, a mere 5'2" tall, but with a presence which impressed even the most worldly of her counsellors. She looked very well, and though so small in stature and without any pretension to beauty, the gracefulness of her manner and the good expression of her countenance give her on the whole a very agreeable appearance. Her youth inspires an excessive interest in all those who approach her. However, Britain in 1837 was a divided, dispirited country. William IV's brief reign had seen a time of enormous political upheaval, which seemed to bewilder the well-intentioned but rather timid king. The first Reform Bill of 1831, for example, which had sought to reform the country's system of parliamentary representation, was eventually defeated in the House of Commons, a result which preempted the dissolution of Parliament. A bad-tempered, acrimonious election followed, which eventually resulted in a sensational Whig victory. Although violence erupted throughout the country, the Great Reform Bill finally became law in 1832. When William's chaotic reign ended in 1837, the reputation of the monarch was at a low ebb, with public confidence in its most reliable institution somehow shaken. Some had even come to despise the monarchy. The new Queen Victoria came undaunted to this unhappy state of affairs, and it is a testament to her personality that by the time of her death she was a figure who commanded worldwide respect and was greatly loved by her people.
When Victoria came to the throne in 1837, the monarchy was in a parlous state. Her grandfather, George III, had been on the throne for 60 years, and he was succeeded by his two sons, first of all George IV, then William IV. These two were corrupt and decadent, had extramarital affairs, large families with actresses, several liaisons with unsuitable women, and this was public knowledge. So the monarchy was really seen as a corrupt and unsavoury set of affairs. George IV had been forced by bribing into marrying a German princess, which he tried to divorce, and on the coronation day had locked her out of Westminster Abbey. This had caused great public sympathy for the Queen, and thus public opinion was really turning against the monarchy.
Victoria was crowned on the 28th of June 1838 and remained on the throne until her death on the 22nd of January 1901. That she survived at all as Queen is perhaps remarkable, as the 19th century is often referred to as an age of revolutions. The underclass of Europe had first exercised their strength in France in 1789, when Louis XVI was deposed and eventually executed 40 years later. In 1830, France was once again plunged into revolutionary turmoil, when King Charles X was forced into exile in England. By 1848, the desire for revolution and change had spread throughout Europe. In Italy, there were uprisings in Venice, Rome, Messina, Palermo, Reggio, and Milan, while rebellions also broke out in the German kingdoms. Increasingly, Europeans wanted to replace small principalities with large estates, in which they believed their voice could be more clearly heard. Queen Victoria wrote of the tumultuous events in Europe in her journal. So much, and such extraordinary, incredible things have been happening these days in France, that I hardly know how or what to write. There is no doubt that Victoria played an important part in ensuring the survival of the British monarchy during the Age of Revolutions. The Queen also set a personal example which had a profound effect on the moral attitudes of the nation. But Victoria had to earn her eventual popularity with her people. It was during the early years of her reign, for example, that she found herself in direct confrontation with her new Prime Minister Robert Peel, who wanted her to make changes in her household in order that the ladies of her bedchamber were of his Tory persuasion, rather than the Whigs which were favoured by the Queen. Displaying her usual strength of mind, Victoria refused, but at that time public opinion was resolutely set against her. In the resultant furore, Peel resigned.
Victoria's early unpopularity stems from the fact that she was a woman. She was the first woman to accede to the throne since Queen Anne, a century and a half before, and this coincided with a great public debate about the public position of women, and the feeling that they should really remain within the household and become icons of motherhood and a sort of safe haven for men to return to. So there was a great debate about whether the person of the monarchy should actually be a woman. She also faced a number of court conspiracies from what she termed her wicked uncles, who were other sons of George III, and who felt that their claim to the throne was greater than hers. There were a number of attempts on her life early in her reign, and although it's difficult to see this as a conspiracy, there was certainly a feeling that the monarchy was in unsuitable hands, being both vested in the person of a woman and at that a 20-year-old woman.
In an effort to improve her popularity, it was suggested by the royal household that the Queen should get married. It would seem that the idea of a royal wedding was popular even then. Perhaps not surprisingly, the headstrong Victoria was completely against the idea, at least at first. I said I dreaded the thought of marrying, that I was so accustomed to have my own way that I thought it 10 to 1 I shouldn't agree with anyone. However, the Queen quickly changed her mind when she met Prince Albert, her handsome cousin from Saxe-Coburg. Victoria appears to have been smitten at first sight, as the enthusiastic entry in her diary reveals. He has an exquisite nose, and such a pretty mouth, with delicate mustachios and slight but very slight whiskers. Albert's beauty is most striking, and he is so amiable and unaffected. In short, very fascinating.
Albert was a German prince. He was the same age as Victoria and had been brought up in a relatively secluded environment. He was a very well educated man. He came to England and with the express intention of seeking out Victoria as his bride, and when they were married devoted a lot of time to the arts, to music. He was the architect of Osborne House, for example, and he was a model farmer, a statesman. He was the instigator of the Great Exhibition of 1851. He was a misunderstood figure because he was a foreigner, he was German, and there was suspicion of him, especially amongst the English politicians. But he was also a diplomat and had paid great attention to detail, and therefore managed to win round most of his critics. Victoria, though, tended to push Albert to the sidelines emphasising her